Welcome to the SaaS AdLab podcast, where we bring you the stories of SaaS founders, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. My name is Luis. I'm the founder of Fantôm Agency, a digital marketing agency specializing in scaling SaaS companies. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Patrick. He is the product manager over at criisp, which is a capital raising platform. So thank you so much for being on here today. I know you're over in Australia, which is pretty far from Phoenix, Arizona. So a huge time difference, but we were able to still get it to work out. So Patrick, again, thank you so much for being on here. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you grew up, and a little bit of your background?
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. So I've grown up in Sydney all my life, and 28 now. I've studied over at UTS, University of Technology, Sydney, doing a Bachelor of Science in IT. And now I'm finalizing my MBA at that same university. My background has predominantly been around technology. So I've worked for the likes of Cisco as a pre-sales engineer. And I've been involved with a few startups as being a founder. And that was over the course of 10 years. So I've had a bit of an experience regarding like starting up a business, scaling it, exiting, and being involved midway through startups and advisory, and also working out of UTS startups, doing some mentorship and guidance as well.
That's really cool. So for anyone that may not notice this, typically we have founders on the show, and this time we actually have a product manager. And Patrick and I spoke a little bit before the podcast, and he gave me a little bit of the background and some of the things he's been able to do and things like that. And it's just very interesting to see how you're able to, from a very early age, right? Like you're still a pretty young individual, like you're only 28. So there's a lot still ahead of you, but you've been able to accomplish quite a bit for someone your age. I think most people would say at least. So with having those companies behind you and seeing things from both perspectives, right? You've been a founder before, you've been a mentor, and now you're part of the product team, essentially the product manager. How do you, what is a key difference between these things, and what do you think people should put a little more emphasis on instead of always wanting to essentially be the founder, and I mentioned this earlier too, is that ego that almost wants to take over and say and tell people, I'm the founder, like I built this and whatnot. But essentially, like there's obviously a lot of things that go with that as well.
Yeah, you've raised a good point. So I think when I did my first real startup, it was Asset Squared. And that was a 3-year journey. And I would say for the majority of the time, it was very ego-driven on my end, because obviously you're bootstrapped, you're running it through your credit cards, you have this ego as your adrenaline rush to better like think that, okay, I'm on top of the world, we're going to get funding. My co-founder and I, when I was at Cisco, we had the idea of going to Andreessen Horowitz to seek out seed funding. So he piggybacked with me on one of the trips, and we already connected through LinkedIn on a couple of partners at Andreessen Horowitz, and he felt he can head over straight to their door, knock on them with an appointment, and he was escorted out by security. But I think founders can be very naive. I know I was, and you need that a little bit to have that encouragement to go with your startup. I think everyone goes through an ego journey at any stage of the life cycle as being a founder. And once you learn to be humble and you realize that, hey, I don't need to be the founder, I can be part of the founding team. That in itself is validation enough. And you can realize that the skill set that you have is still going to get recognized. It's still going to be used. And then you can still be impactful in the beginning and scaling of that startup. I think over those last few years of doing that startup for Asset Squared, it certainly taught me a lot to be humble with where you're at and take stock of what you've achieved. Mind you, the original premise with Asset Squared was a a financial engine that allows the shared ownership of assets. So think of it as a stock exchange for art, wine, vintage cars, and property. And since then, I've left the business, and it's now pivoted into more of a crowdfunding exercise for cryptocurrency. And I'll be frank, my co-founder and I didn't leave on great terms, but we've since tried to reconcile and go from now.
Cool. Very cool story. And definitely, I think you definitely touched on something important. It's again, just to piggyback right of what I said, is the ego. And I think that there's definitely, especially, since that company was started when you were even younger. And I think those are definitely the years where, the guy inside of you, the man inside of you wants to do all these big things. And, you found a company, and like you said, you're going off of credit cards and, kind of doing whatever you can to get by, but still get to say that it was you who built the company and everything else that comes with that, which, it's definitely nice. But I think as people mature and, you start to learn new things and all that stuff, there's definitely, you're able to take more ownership of where you're at, like you said, which is always good. So I think that's a great start to the podcast. And now to kind of, dive a little bit more into the company criisp and what it does and how, it kind of came to be. As I understand, it is a children company or a partner company of Wholesale Investor.
Yes.
One of the first questions that came to my mind when I saw that essentially was, when do you realize, as part of the founding team and part of the team at Wholesale Investor, when do you realize when the time is right to bring this other product into the picture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a little bit of background for those who don't know what Wholesale Investor is. It's a marketing and events business that connects investors to companies. And predominantly we have companies as our clients and a database of over 24,000 investors across Asia Pacific, Europe, and little bits in between. So I think when we realized that there's we can easily connect a company to investors and have them at the trade stands, do an expression of interest form. It's all on paper. There's that innate problem where how do you hold the investors accountable for when they go ahead and show their interest? When do you know are the right signals to get a hold of that investor to help close your round? And a lot of those questions were answered by this product, criisp, where we needed to try and hold accountability for the investors and the companies, give better insight as to the effectiveness of their capital raise. And being an administration platform, we wanted to give those companies better insights as to what they're doing right and what they can do to better improve.
Right. And the pricing model of criisp, where does that kind of come into play? Like, how do you realize, what it is that you need to charge people for this specific product?
Yeah, so we toyed around with the idea of a month-to-month price, but it doesn't necessarily do it as a service to the investors that we have on the platform, because you can't have a fly-by-night company going through a deal raise and close it within a month. Right. That's a pipe dream. The idea that we're trying to encourage with annual subscriptions is to better educate companies to know that capital raising takes a relationship with investors over several months. Regardless of how many investors are on the platform, they need to be comfortable and better understand what your business is about, what your investment opportunity is. And actually, there's still that emotion that plays from it. So you can't expect an investor to get involved with a business if they haven't known you for more than 3 months or so. So we'll probably look into quarterly pricing, but again, it's education that's important to those companies, better understanding as to how you execute effective fundraising.
definitely. And how does that look when, for example, like let's say, right, you have those like you said, I think you said it was 7 months from, the time period. What essentially, for those that don't necessarily, including myself, understand, the whole journey of pitching to actually getting investment, what happens on CRISP throughout that whole period of time?
Yeah. So we usually onboard the clients way before they even begin their journey. So, for example, the scenario that we play with Wholesale Investor and CRISP is when we run events and they get offered CRISP alongside that, we usually onboard them on CRISP as soon as possible, even before we have our events. And that helps them better understand what they're doing to set up their deal room. What documents do they need for investors to go straight to there and get the information they need. And then actually gives us an opportunity to better understand what their business is about, helping with some initial due diligence, ensuring that the deal opportunity is legitimate. And that 7-month journey is predominantly setting it up right, making sure that everything's good to go. Then preparing your let's say 10 slide pitch deck that you're going to be doing as part of your presentation to give investors a better understanding as to what your business is about and that opportunity that you're looking to go with. And then you connect them over to the CRISP deal room, which will then start tracking that 7-month relationship. Okay. So you can say, I've invited those investors, or they've requested access. That's been accepted. You can see in the activity feed of what the investor's been doing. And then you can go ahead and have your documents there. You can then see your investors, prospect investors, have downloaded those documents, have asked questions. Pretty much any touch point and interaction is kind of tracked, so you can get a better understanding as to what they're doing.
So the way I'm kind of understanding it here, as far as like the analytics side of it, I'm thinking of something like, I don't know if you're familiar, but with like PandaDoc, where you get an agreement and then essentially it starts to tell you like, oh, like this person viewed this page of the document, for 13 seconds or like for 5 minutes and so on. So something like that.
Yes, very similar. So it predominantly is once they've downloaded the document or viewed the room, it could be multiple times at different stages. We do that tracking.
Very cool. Now, so you also mentioned as far as, so really anyone that goes through Wholesale Investor at this point, they're also being onboarded onto CRISP.
Yes. So it's kind of a mandate on our end that we kind of want our Wholesale Investor clients to be on the best footing possible. And having that is meaning also giving them CRISP. It gives them a better understanding as to how the capital raise is going. And then also kind of digitizes the experience that they would have otherwise had with investors being given business cards from the company, sending emails, keeping track on spreadsheets, and then 2 weeks later going, oh, hey, I need to speak to Joe. I'm not sure if he's still interested in my cap raise.
Right. Okay. That's really, really cool. Now, when it comes to actually finding, I guess both sides of the deal, how do you go about finding investors to join the platform / Wholesale Investor, and how do the companies that are looking for investment find you?
So we've carried with Wholesale Investor, it's been around for over 10 years. So we've been able to leverage its reputation and image to carry the 24,000 plus strong investors to get those investors into the deal rooms and kind of market from there. And then on the same token, when we've been, so Wholesale Investor was originally a publication and it was listing companies as opportunities for actual magazine subscribers, and then it moved into a marketing and events business. So we've been able to leverage a lot of what Wholesale Investor has already done to bring in companies to and then bring in investors. So now is a good point of going, okay, we've got access to all of this marketing, and we can try and target it effectively, but we need to scale it, or we need to stage it as we go along, because the platform was just launched just over a month ago. But we've been developing for 18 months with beta testing 6 months before then. But we're already set at over 60 deal rooms already. So we've got a significant amount of traction, but then we also need to respect that as we're building up the utilization of the platform. We have access to tap into the 24,000 investors, but not all of them at once are going to access only 60 deal rooms.
Right.
So how do we, what we're tackling is two things. One is the education aspect of the platform and telling the investors and the companies what it's about, how they use it, and effectively onboard. And then the second part is which investors do we target to get the most out of, for the companies to get the most out of this platform too. So there are different stages that we can do the marketing or remarketing and everything else, but right now is just more of the launch and the education aspect, and then making sure that we execute it properly.
Mm-hmm. Now and I didn't know that the platform had only launched like so recently, right? So I thought like this was, I don't know, maybe a couple of years after, you know, the obviously like wholesale investor has been out for a long time. So I figured Chris was out there for like, you know, at least 2 years, not a month. So that's actually a surprise to me. So that's really cool, because it seems like right off the bat, and obviously this has to actually come from, you know, some of that traction, like you mentioned, that wholesale investor has already put together for such a long period of time. But as a product manager, what are some of the things that kind of held you back? You know, you mentioned that it has been in development for over 18 months. Like, what were some of the things that you saw within that time period that kind of, you know, put blocks in front of you?
The best one would be, and I think a lot of founders would resonate with this, it's you're suffering from a whole bunch of features that you could put into the platform, but you're not prioritizing it right. I think we went through one major redesign to make sure that it's done right. But I think the thing that we needed to focus on was not even just the MVP stage. We've gone past that, but it's more going, what is the core functionality needed for the investors and the companies, because they're both as equal stakeholders.
Right.
And taking stock to look at what do they need rather than what we want to give.
And how did you find what that thing was, and what is that thing?
Yeah, so our thing was predominantly focusing on the deal room and ensuring deal flow goes smoothly from going onboarding through to the raise and then closing that round. So through open to close, we needed to make sure that that experience was accounted for in the roadmap. And one of the things that we had covered earlier on was building out a roadmap, showing the features that, like, allowing the team to go through any and all features that they want to go through, and then have the platform, and then actually setting priorities for it, because like we can't do everything all at once.
Right.
And we need to prioritize features one at a time for the ones that are most effective. And like you can have a client that may try and want to white label your product and give you a sizable amount of money, but you need to kind of go, okay, does this go with or against our roadmap?
Right.
And going back onto that, because you need to treat it like a Bible.
Right. And I totally, you know, I definitely understand what you want to bring with that statement, right? Like, you definitely need to keep in mind what, like, why you started the whole thing, and not letting someone that, like you said, wants to white label kind of throw things to the side and change how things are going to be done essentially.
Mm.
But with those 18 months that, the product was in development, what is one thing that, knowing now, you would have changed, say, from month 1 to month 3?
I would say onboarding partners earlier rather than later. I think we're building out the advocacy for CRISP.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst we've leveraged a lot of the relationships that we've had with wholesale investor, I think we would have saved a lot of time by having those relationships with the feedback, with it all ready to go. So as soon as launch was going from day one, then we would have had partners and advisors that use the platform ready to go, ready to not necessarily resell, but more or less advocate for the product. Mm-hmm. So we're now in a situation where we're building out that ecosystem. We're setting a mandate to be more involved with that ecosystem and going, where does CRISP fit for not only just startups, but pre-IPO and IPO businesses?
That's cool. And and I still want to touch on the fact that you've been on the other end of things as a founder as well.
Yeah.
So how does that differ from, like what you mentioned now, like making sure that those things were in place beforehand? How does that differ from what you would have done, in the past? Like, were the things that you learned on the first company or the second company the same things that you learned this time around? And was anything that you learned actually implemented, on the latest project, being CRISP?
Yeah, I think the best thing was this, so my background's in systems thinking and everything like that. So ensuring that there are processes for customer support, what's that workflow look like? When we go through feasibility for features, how does that look like and how do we better validate that so it goes into the right priority for the product roadmap? A lot of that experience came from outsourcing our development for Asset Squared in a couple of countries, and then going, okay, what do we need to prioritize? And we started off using Jira and Confluence. So Atlassian's a great product, like a great company, sorry, and something that we highly strive for in regards to their excellence. So I've always carried Jira and Confluence with me for every startup. And right now we're using Jira Service Desk and Confluence as part of our self-service support and knowledge base because it's quite extensible, but it also is fairly seamless.
Very cool. Since we're already on the topic of talking about a little bit, on different companies, what are, in your mind, what are the companies that are kind of doing things very, very well, and the companies that you look up to as far as like what they've been able to do, what they've implemented in the way that they've done it?
Yeah, one standout is Intercom. I think they've got a very great product that integrates very nicely with customer environments. And then furthermore than that, they've kind of started, that they haven't just started, they've built out that ecosystem. They've got a podcast as well. It's great to listen to and great insights too. And you get a lot of value from it, not just from what they provide as a product, but what they also give back to the community. And I think when people create startups and strive for product excellence, you also need to see where this fits in your market and what you can do to give back. Yeah. So I think what we're trying to do is follow in the footsteps of what Intercom has done so far.
Mm-hmm. Now with that, as far as following footsteps, and I like that a lot because I'm a big believer on, repeating successful actions. And if you see somebody that's done something well, that means that if you try, and that doesn't mean, let's go out there and copy, word by word or whatever you want to call it, what they've done. It just means that the things that they've done in the past, and maybe the the sequence of which they've been done could be successful, then it could probably be replicated in different with a different model or something, that differs in some way. With that being said, what are some of the things, with Chris still being so young, that are down in the roadmap for you?
Yeah, so I guess in the roadmap for CRISP, we're releasing secondary trading. So that's going to allow businesses that have already gone through a deal raise to allow investors to, I guess, trade places. So they don't necessarily need to go through another raise in order to add that liquidity to a business. The second thing that's also fairly important in, I guess, in Australia is that the investment landscape is quite small in comparison to the US.
Yeah.
So there's a huge focus on angel investors and syndication. So that's another thing that we've got in the pipeline as well. So you can have syndicates run out of the platform to then go and fund into startups and other businesses. So we're trying to better educate the Australian community, and then from there to go, hey, you can actually get funded in Australia with your Australian business. We've also got Singaporean, US, and New Zealand companies using the platform too. So, yeah.
All within a month with time.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And as far as the things that have been the most successful in the building of CRISP, what would you say those are?
Ooh. I would say the team. We've tried to keep things nimble, and it's, I would say the nimbleness of the team and making sure that we stay focused on what we're trying to achieve. Okay. We're doing weekly meetings on a product perspective to make sure things are on track. We're reaching our goals needed for user and deal room growth, and kind of ensure and the partnerships that we've already started establishing, not just here in Australia, but globally, to build that advocacy is going to be truly amazing. So I think what I'm really proud of is actually releasing the product and launching it, and then actually seeing the traction. And I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, it's definitely something really exciting. It's especially because, like I said, it's just the period of time that you've been, out in the market and having the success that you've had so far is definitely speaks for itself. So that's awesome. And now I do like to ask a little bit more personal questions towards the end of the podcast, right? So number one, what is something that you're not very good at? Or the one thing?
I'd say a weakness. And again, I think founders can relate to this. I need to learn to pull emotions aside sometimes. I think when some decision making happens, and this is when I was, I guess in the first startup I was doing, it wasn't just the ego, it was also feeling as though I'm right and this decision's meant to be it. I'm not saying I do that now, but more or less it's a constant practice.
Yeah.
Making sure that you can be passionate, that's no issue. But as soon as you're now making an argument out of something, take a step back and realize, hey, is this really worth it? I need to respect the other person I'm talking to. Yeah. So it's been a work in progress. But I'd say that one, just keeping emotions in check.
Definitely a good one, especially when you're dealing with, in the investor world and all that stuff. It's definitely a good thing to make sure you have a handle on. And as far as something you believe that you're really good at, what would that be?
I would say long-term relationships. So from my experience with Cisco, we were dealing with fairly long sales cycles because they could be multi-million-dollar deals. And it was from a So it was a division within Cisco, so Cisco Meraki. And that was a startup that got acquired by Cisco for about 1.2 billion. And it grew into one of Cisco's largest profitable departments. So dealing with those sorts of deals, you need to understand and learn that it takes longer to close. Right. So I kind of had that grown into me that I can't close on short sales cycles. So I work on long-term relationships that see value, and value on both sides. So you can't be like a car salesman trying to flog off a piece of product, hoping that they go ahead and take it. There's ramifications with that. So I'd say that's the strength I've got.
How does that affect, the way you see other type of deals, right? So you're so used to seeing these multi-million-dollar deals, or maybe not even, but hundreds of thousands, like $500,000 deals, and it's still a pretty large amount of money. How does that affect the way you see, let's say, somebody buying or going for the annual membership for CRISP, where it's nothing huge? Do you still expect it to be, I guess the question is, do you expect that sale to be much shorter since it's such a small value? Used to see huge amounts.
Yeah, of course. So I think the answer for that is yes and no. Mainly because, sure, it's smaller commitment that they need to have with us in order to get onto the platform. But their decision making for that deal raise still affects them for anywhere between $500,000 to $1.5 to $10 million raises. So there is still some decision making needed on their end to go, is this the right product for us?
Right.
And then understanding the ramifications from there, going, okay, how does this help us with our X dollar raise?
Totally. That makes sense. And last question here, Patrick. Do you have any questions for me?
Ooh. Not currently. I think I'd love to keep in touch further regarding what we CRISP can do over in the state. And I think it'll be good to see where you guys grow as well. So be more than happy to stay in touch.
Definitely. Maybe we'll get to work with some of the companies that are being funded through CRISP.
Yeah, so we, I'll do a little plug now. So CRISP actually offers a free tier, which is a starter package. It's free for a lifetime. Effectively, you can set up your deal room, add your pitch documents, and invite investors. And that gives you, I guess, the taste of being having good financial hygiene when you do your cap raise. So if you head on to criisp.io, criisp.io, you can sign up to a free tier. If you're interested in something a bit more long-term, we do have startup pricing. I am always looking for advocates. So if that's something that people are interested in, reach out to me directly.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you, Patrick, so much. It was really a pleasure having you on here, and definitely learned a lot about, investment, how it works, a little bit more about your background, which is awesome, and how you see things when you've been able to be on, different positions in different companies, and how, even though we didn't necessarily talk about that, but how you kind of grow when you're in certain, areas of life doing certain things. So it's really cool how you were able to reflect on those and then speak to them later on with a new position, doing different things, and just impacting people in different ways. So,
thanks, Lewis. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being on here today, and we'll catch you soon.
Definitely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.